Very warm welcome, everyone. It's wonderful to have you here. Thank you so much. Very warm welcome to the opening of the Austria in Europe Days. My name is Ali Aslan. I'm an international TV host, presenter and journalist. And as I am based in Berlin, gestatten Sie mir, dass ich das Publikum auch noch mal ganz herzlich auf Deutsch willkommen heiße. But rest assured, for everyone who's non-German speaking, this was the only bit in German today, because of course this session is being conducted in English. Ladies and gentlemen, the Austria in Europe Days will revolve around the annual theme of this year's forum, namely Moment of Truth. Today's opening session will feature an impressive lineup of high-level speakers who will address the four themes and tracks of the forum, namely finance and economy, climate, as well as democracy and security, ladies and gentlemen. We can all look forward to great speakers, but this is supposed to be an interactive session, so you are all welcome to submit your questions and remarks via the forum's app, and it'll be my pleasure to introduce and include those questions as the discussion evolves, ladies and gentlemen. And now, without further ado, to kick off the Austria in Europe Days and focusing on the first bracket, if you will, on the first theme of finance economy, is joining us live from Vienna is none other than Austria's Federal Minister of Finance. He's joining us live and should be seen in just a second. Please welcome Magnus Brunner, ladies and gentlemen. Minister, it's great to have you with us. I hope you can hear us well. Very much looking forward to your initial remarks. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for this very kind introduction. And first of all, please take my apologies not to be in Alpbach this year in person. It's the first time actually for many years that I couldn't come in person. Please take my apologies for that. And secondly, please take my congratulations also for the slogan for the European Forum Alpbach 2024. Moments of Truth sounds like a James Bond film, actually, on the first side. But it is, I would say, so well chosen. On the other hand, I think the next 5 years, which are coming up on a European level, are quite crucial for Europe, with a lot of challenges, especially when it comes to the competitiveness of the European Union. I think Europe is in, I would say, quite a critical stage when it comes to the future direction of the European Union's financial but also economic policy, as you mentioned in the beginning. After pandemic crisis, after energy crisis, after inflation crisis, I think the European Union's economy is developing rather, I would say, a little bit reluctantly. And globally, we see, of course, indications of the world economy being on a path of a sort of robust growth again, but mainly because of the strong US economy, also because of state interventions, of course, of the Chinese government, and also because of the strong emerging markets and also the developing countries altogether. But I think we also see some glimmer of hope in Europe, in the European Union. We have an increase of production in Germany by 2.3 percentage points, very much because of the automotive sector, increased by 5.7%. Also in Austria, we see some glimmer of hope. The cargo sector is doing very well. That's always a bit of an indicator, 6 to 10 months in advance, and also the packaging part is doing quite well. But the European Union, of course, is facing, I would say, some major challenges. It's a very crucial phase, as I said before, for the European financial and also economic policy. And so, in my opinion, it is more important than ever to increase our competitiveness and also to strengthen the European Union as an economic location. I think we need to adapt a bit more quickly, I would say, to these ever-changing, also international circumstances, especially because we see increasingly global conflicts, of course, inflation, high interest rates. So we have to work definitely on our resilience as a European Union, and as I said before, on our competitiveness. I think in recent centuries we have become quite, I would say, accustomed a little bit to free trade and also to an opening of our capital markets, and that's of course a big success of the globalization altogether. But there's a big but behind that. If we want to achieve on a European level a real internal market, I think it definitely needs more. We have to reduce the subsidy competition on the one hand, and we have to remove hurdles. We have to cut these famous red tapes we're always talking about. And very crucial, I think, for more competitiveness on a European level will be a deepening of the capital markets union. That's one of the crucial things, I think, which are coming up in the next 5 years. And why is that the case? I think that's the case because a functional capital market is so essential, I would say, for a long-term economic growth also, in order not to fall behind, increasingly behind other regions in the world. And this public money, of course, will be needed. There's no doubt about that. But we also have to mobilize private capital to finance all the aims we have, all the digital transition, the ecological transition, the green transition altogether. And that's why we definitely need private capital to be mobilized. And that is needed to remain actually a serious competitor also on a worldwide level as a European Union on a global stage. So in the last years, the European Union was mainly focusing on the Green Deal, which is good on the one hand, of course. But I think before we are able to implement a Green Deal till the very end, I think we need a sort of New Deal for more competitiveness on a European level. So, ladies and gentlemen, especially for Austria, and it's Austria in Europe, especially for Austria as a small and open economy, very much export oriented, a strong European Union is, of course, essential, is very important. Let's work on that, I would say, in the next years to come. Let's work on that together. I wish you all the best for the coming days in Alpbach. Good discussions, interesting meetings, of course, in such a beautiful surrounding in the Tyrolean Alps. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Minister, for your preliminary remarks. Of course, we would have loved to have you here, but we very much understand that occasions sometimes present themselves. I know that you don't have a lot of time, but allow me just perhaps a quick follow-up question. You're not just Austria's federal minister, but you've also been nominated as Austria's next EU commissioner. It may be a bit premature to speak about it now, but which goals, visions, if you will, are you planning on moving from Vienna to Brussels? What is the vision? What are the goals that you set forth for yourself?
As you mentioned, I think it's a bit too early because it's not quite clear yet. And I'm actually on my way to Brussels this evening to have a discussion or a meeting also with President von der Leyen about sort of which direction at least my my work is going to take in the next 5 years. But altogether, I think it's a lot about, and it's almost everything, as I said before, about competitiveness. And there are many different things with which we can put forward the European competitiveness. That is cutting red tapes on the one hand, that is deepening the capital markets union, as I mentioned before. Also, maybe being a bit more serious when it comes to the green transition. I think that is also something which has to go together with competitiveness. We always have to ask ourselves, in my point of view, how can we reach the climate goals on the one hand and additionally still remain competitive? And we have very ambitious goals when it comes to the green transition. And of course, it's one of the greatest challenges we face at the moment on a worldwide level. But I always say climate and environmental policy must go hand in hand with budget policy and fiscal policy. Because if a measure against climate change is not in the budget, it just doesn't take place. And I think we have to combine these two things together, these two policy forms together. And I think that should be in the focus of the European Union in the next 5 years.
And I think that's a message that is very well received by everyone here, but particularly by Luisa Neubauer and Anna Stürk, who will be on the stage right after you, talking about climate and, of course, the Green Deal and Europe's role in it. You've already pointed out that Europe is finds itself in a pivotal moment of time, and it does need bold action to compete again in the world, for European firms once again to compete. If you're looking at the numbers, they've significantly fallen behind their US counterparts. Without getting into the details, of course, in the short amount of time, but if you are traveling, when you're traveling around Europe and meeting your counterparts and colleagues, do you sense the sense of motivation and strength that Europe still has in order to overcome these challenges? Sometimes it feels we're in a bit of a slum, doesn't it?
Yes, we sometimes get the feeling, definitely. But I really do think that all my colleagues, as you mentioned, in the ECOFIN, for instance, but also on all other ministers and on all levels, I think definitely want to get forward, want to get Europe moving forward. And I think that is the main thing to do in the next 5 years. And it's all about, as I said before, all about competitiveness, which we have to work on. It was the Green Deal 5 years ago, and it's going to be definitely the competitiveness in the next 5 years. And I think everyone is really working hard on that. If I look at on the European level, in the ECOFIN, but also on the Euro level, I think everyone really works hard on that, whether it's the Capital Markets Union, whether it's the cutting the red tapes, whether it's more competitiveness altogether, whether it's the energy part. I think everyone is knowing now, and really does know, that we have to work on that, because otherwise we increasingly tend to fall behind other regions in the world, and that's what we have to avoid.
Have to avoid at all costs. That is for certain, Minister. I know time is almost up. So lastly, since we are at the opening of the Austria in Europe Days, what strength will Austria specifically bring to policy making in Brussels and Strasbourg moving forward? Well, what is the one distinctive element and strength and factor that Austria can bring to the table here?
I think Austria was very, I would say, relevant when it came to environmental, or when it came to energy transition. I think we did quite a good job when it came to the whole tax system. Some very important reforms we did in the last years, I would say. Also, when it comes to reducing barriers, I think we played quite an important role on a European level, and also when it comes, and that is a very important point, when it comes to financial literacy. We did quite a good job there, I think, in the last years. So a lot of reforms, structural reforms, and that is very well received on a European level.
Thank you so much, Minister Brunner, for taking the time. I know you're on a tight schedule, and as you pointed out yourself, on your way to Brussels. Best of luck for your next step, presumably as Austria's next EU Commissioner, and of course, best of luck to Europe in the future. Ladies and gentlemen, Austria's Federal Minister of Finance, Magnus Brunner, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And ladies and gentlemen, before we move along with the program, during the forum, there's been an immersive artistic intervention when it comes to the life in the form of an election campaign. And you might have seen it walking around Alpbach. 2 utopian ideas were presented via familiar rituals and symbols, of course, posters throughout Alpbach, a polling booth, political rally, slogans, manifestos, and campaign videos. The results will actually be announced tonight during an election party on the roof of this building. For everyone who's curious about what this is all about, let's have a quick look.
They take your jobs. Let's say thank you. Vote for SPA. Post-work. High life.
Well, I think it might be too late for the upcoming election, but I think this party could get some votes along Europe. Ladies and gentlemen, now it is my great pleasure, of course, to welcome to the stage the president of the European Forum of Alpbach, who will welcome you with some remarks and give a short summary of the previous module titled Europe in the World Days. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Andreas Treichel.
First of all, I tell you for whom I'm going to vote. It's definitely SPA, because the other party refused to exclude WASPs, and there are so many of them around, and I'm not going to vote for a party that sticks me in my neck. Sorry to all you fans, but that's my view. Welcome to the European Forum Alpbach. Welcome to all incredibly honored guests, ministers, and so on. And welcome to all honored guests. And also incredibly honored scholarship holders. Love that you're here again. We had incredibly interesting discussions here. And I had a chance to give my view of Europe, and I managed to do that in 15 minutes without bitching at politicians. I'm very proud of that. And what I would like to do today is just to, not bitch, to give you sort of a good introduction to an event that I'm really looking forward to very much, having two young politicians and activists, one from the Liberal and one from the Green side, getting here to rock us with their views and their engagement. I would just like to start with a few questions that I hope some of them they will cover. I'm not going to bore you with my main topics on Europe, capital markets and pension systems, because it's not necessary anymore, because you saw our Minister Magnus Brunner talking about financial literacy, talking about capital markets. You heard Mrs. von der Leyen talking about the need that we need a European capital market. So it's all done. The only problem is that he's now moving to Brussels, most likely, and he will need a replacement in Austria that again catches up and talks, because capital markets in Europe will not be done by Brussels, it will be done by the nation states. So we need to get the nation states to work on it. And we need to get the nation states to take it really importantly and really to think about the fact that a European pension system, as boring as it might be, and then I will stop talking about that, is hugely important for Europe, because we have countries in Europe who have capital-funded pension schemes, mostly in Scandinavia, and we have countries that have none of that, like Austria, like Germany, like France, like Italy, and that will lead to a new diversion of wealth in Europe that people in my age will not feel, but the young politicians that will get on stage right after me will feel it dramatically. And if the Greens in Europe believe that they do not have to talk about it because it's not a green subject, it's totally wrong. And if the liberals or the Christian Democrats or the Social Democrats or the conservatives in Europe believe that they do not need to talk about green and the transformation, they're totally wrong, because it's also incredibly important. And that is what our big hope has to be for the next generation. So let's ask ourselves a couple of questions, and we have discussed them in the forum extensively with brilliant people and with brilliant discussions, and we will have some more on that during the next days. How is it possible that we have an extensive accession process in the European Union in which every country that wants to join the European Union has to go with a lot of scrutiny through a process where they can prove that they will foster free media, an independent justice, an independent central bank, and so on. And they all work on it, and they all do it, and then once they have joined, they go back and start to destroy what they have built. How is that possible? Let me ask a second question. How is it possible that the European Union does something which I personally would have never, ever in my dreams expected? Take strong side on Ukraine and say Ukraine will be is part of Europe and will be part of the European Union one day. That's why we'll defend it. And then the European Union spends 140 billion euros on it, of which unfortunately 110 to 115 billion go outside of Europe, because we have to purchase all those things in order to deliver them to Ukraine from other countries. The Americans join in with another 100 million, and we're now at the end of August 2024, and Ukraine is still suffering terribly. I don't know. It's such a wonderful effort, such a revolutionary step on part of the European Union, but so far we have had no success. Do we believe that we will have success on that during the next months, or will the Ukrainians continue to suffer? I don't understand it. It escapes me, because I thought it would be possible to actually solve that conflict at some point in time. The third thing I would like to think about is, why was it possible that many, many years ago, I think it was in the year 2008, the European Union said we will be the leader in digitization in the world. We said it, we announced it, and we know already now it hasn't happened, and it's extremely unlikely that it will happen in the future. And then some years ago, we started bravely and very welcomed by everybody. We will lead the green transition in the world. And so far, we're leading green regulation, but we do not lead the green transition. Why do all those things happen? Is it the fault of the European Union, or is it the fault of the nation states? What's the purpose of it? And I think there are many, many, many reasons that we're striving to do great things, but we just don't finish. We're wonderful in announcing things, and we are not excellent enough in execution, unfortunately. I think it's pretty easy to get an answer because we are in a union that doesn't exist anywhere else, and everything has to be discussed. We lose time, and we get into compromises. So what would we hope that a new generation of politicians would do differently, or maybe better than my generation and the generation in between? One thing that comes to my mind, if we look at Germany, we have presently 3 parties who run the government, and Germany is not doing extremely well. We have the Greens, we have the Social Democrats, and we have the Liberals. And I believe it is the form and the way in which these 3 parties reach compromises and in which they negotiate with each other. And the issue for me is that the Greens want their issues solved, then they go about with the Social Democrats and the Liberals, and they start exchanging. And in that exchange, the result that comes out for the Green side is not optimal, the result that comes out for the Liberals is not optimal, and the result that comes out for the Social Democrats is not optimal. You cannot exchange the transformation into green energy with a sensible pension system. It's not possible. If you want the optimal pension system for Germany, you cannot have it that Social Democrats said, I only will agree with you if you agree with me on this. And this happens all the time. This happens in nation states, and this also happens on the European level. So why do I talk about that? What can we do in Altbach for it? Talk, discuss, and create an environment where we accept the fact that we have different political views in Europe, in all generations. We have Social Democrats, we have Christian Democrats, we have Greens, we have Liberals, and we have Conservatives. But all of them who believe that a strong European Union creates substantially stronger European nations should fight for the same purpose. And parties who do not believe that, who do not believe that a stronger European Union creates stronger European nation states, and we have them, and they're winning, unfortunately, in many countries, are not part of it. But we can only contain them if those who believe in that fact work together in an incredibly professional way in which we reach compromises where the Greens leave success to the Liberals, where the Social Democrats leave success to the Christian Democrats, and where we all accept each other. If we think about those issues that we need to solve in Europe, they are not ideological. If we believe that the right and perfect pension system for Europe has anything to do with on which side of the political spectrum you stand, we're just simply wrong. It's just something that we need to solve, and if we don't solve it together, it will not happen. And that is one thing that we have to do here in Altbach, to give politicians, no matter where they are, the security that there are young people around and older people around, and we don't know which political beliefs they have, but they want those things solved from European politicians. And European politicians can only solve it if the national politicians are willing to work with them together. I would like to go to the simplest example that's totally escapes my imagination that we cannot actually get. It's Enrico later mentions it also all the time. We're talking in Europe, at least for 60 years, that we need to be able to get traffic from the roads onto the railways, because that will make Europe cleaner. We're talking about it for 60 years. And about 15, 20 years ago, we started talking about we have to eliminate air traffic between European capitals. That's why we need a European railway system. We talked about that for ages and for ages and for ages. In the meantime, the Chinese have a fantastic system, the Japanese have a fantastic system, the French have a fantastic system, Italy has a great system, Spain has a great system, but Europe does not. The only cross-border railway system is between Belgium and France. Why can't we do that? Why can't we not do that? Is it the fault of the European Union? No. Definitely not. It's because the unions of the German railway system and the unions of the Austrian railway system and the union of the whatever country railway system just don't get together and say, let's build it. So what can we do in order to get this done? The only thing we can do is we're all civil society, no matter where we are. If we make our local politicians believe that if they want our vote, they have to build a European railway system. This is what Altbach is for. This is what this organization is for. And this is what pisses me off so often that I hear from people who say, oh, this is to left, or this is to right, or this is whatever. This is not left place, this is not a right place, this is not a liberal place. This is a place for everybody who wants a stronger Europe, because we want stronger European nation states. So please, let's talk about these things, not only here in Altbach, 365 days in the year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Andreas Streichel. I would say, I was going to say for your welcome remarks, but it's more like a welcome rant. But very passionate. I think your message, judging by the applause, was very well received. You mentioned, of course, rightfully, the new generation of politicians and political activists, and I'm very pleased to invite two of them now up on stage to give their versions about how Europe can and ought to move forward. The term climate, of course, has come up numerous times already during this segment, and rightfully so, and this segment will focus on this very pertinent subject matter. First up, she's a prominent climate activist and a best-selling author. Her latest book, Der Klimaatlas, the Climate Atlas, is out now. Great to have her in Altbach, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Luisa Neubauer.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great to have you.
Dankeschön. Thank you, thank you. Yeah, I brought a little book presentation here. No, it's a good book. Can recommend that one. Yes, I have a bit of a hay fever, so excuse my my cracky voice. I am Luisa Neubauer. As been mentioned, I'm a climate justice activist. I'm based in Germany. It's my first time this year in Altbach. Thank you so much for having me. I was asked to speak about economic growth and climate protection here. And this could be the beginning of a really wonderful story, I would say. Looking at the numbers, one could say we figured it out. Take Germany, for instance. In the past 20 years, German emissions dropped by 23%, while GDP increased by 22%. Austria, similar case, achieved emissions reduction of almost 9% in the past 20 years, while the economy grew by 15% over the last 2 decades. There are more examples like that all over the planet. Beautiful numbers everywhere telling a very beautiful story. If it wasn't for this little but in the story, that it isn't really a story that those numbers tell, it's much more a fairy tale. In the same time as Germany might have shown the world how to decouple emissions and GDP, Germany has missed 3 of its climate targets, was forced to pay millions to Brussels over environmental damages, and was taught by its highest court that Germany's climate action is in fact so bad it's not okay with our constitution. Our leading industry, the automobile industry, meanwhile started one of the most brutal consumer fraud cases in the century, known as the diesel scandal, everything to just circumvent environmental regulation. Our largest bank, meanwhile, in Germany, the Deutsche Bank, was named one of the dirtiest banks of Europe, over investing again millions in new fossil fuel projects. Our German forest is dying, deadly algae is spreading at the sea coasts, and our Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, had to get out his welly boots 3 times this year alone to visit historic flood sites. None of that is reflected in numbers that are usually shown to prove how to grow economies without growing environmental damages. None of that. And paradoxically, any solid climate catastrophe will most likely lead to an increase of GDP, once again reminding us that GDP might just be a bit outdated to actually assess the state of an economy. Economy that's more than GDP, I don't need to tell you that. It's well-being, it's security, it's safety, it's childcare, it's job prospects for young people. All of that is struggling globally, while countries like Germany and Austria try to celebrate their comeback after the recession. CO2 as a measurement for the state of the climate might just be as misleading. The climate crisis isn't just CO2. It's our biodiversity, it's our waters, it's our right to a future, it's our ecosystem, it's our air. All of that is struggling right now, while countries and companies across the globe, in Austria and Germany alike, are trying to celebrate their decreasing emissions in their beautiful reports. Numbers like CO2 and GDP are often used to underline a seemingly rational story of calculation, of economics, of hard power. Oftentimes, these very numbers, however, they are used to tell everything but a rational story. Instead, they are used to illustrate a fairy tale of never-ending growth on a dying planet. What does it mean? We have not yet figured out how to actually grow resilient economies that serve people and the planet, and to me, this is good news, because it means we can make it better. We can stop listening to the fairy tales, we can stop telling those fairy tales, and we can get back to work. And one more thing, because this forum is held under the title Moment of Truth in the upcoming days, we will hear many voices speaking about the apparent truth. We will hear concerned voices flagging the dire situation of our planet, our democracies, our societies. We will hear very concerned voices warning of the future. And we will hear concerned voices trying to sell their business ideas as so-called solutions. Numbers will be thrown around to showcase how certain investment and certain technologies will solve our problems. Don't get me wrong, I'm all in favor of good investment in the right stuff and good technologies to provide solutions. I just want to warn you that because the situation is so dire, we do not have time to fall for solutions that create more problems than they solve. And let me quickly provide that with an example. Imagine you're an investor, say you're a bank, one of the largest banks of Austria. You get to sponsor one of the most prestigious political forums of Austria. On your website, you proudly claim to be net zero by 2050. And in the moment of truth, for instance, here at the Alpbach Forum, what do you say as the Erste Bank Group? Do you truthfully disclose that in this very moment you are providing the money to open up the largest fossil fuel gas field of Europe, kind of openly violating the global call to end fossil fuel projects and thereby shredding basically any environmental promise you could possibly make? Just asking. Or say you're Austrian politicians, we will hear many of those as well in the upcoming days. Do you admit how much there are still to do around here in terms of, say, renewables? I heard we are in Tyrol, I heard there's not a single wind turbine installed here, which again is then being used to import dirty coal energies. Do you openly admit that the failure of your own renewable strategies is providing excuses for, say, some dirty banks around to open up new gas fields around Europe, which we definitely do not need? Do you talk about the fact of Just asking. Just questions. Do you talk about the fossil fuel subsidies that you still grant as a country, or the fact that you have still failed to introduce something as basic as a climate law in Austria? Just asking. Time is running, and we have too many problems to solve. So, in the upcoming days, I urge you to listen closely, to not just look at the numbers, but look closely what's behind those numbers. I urge you to ask the uncomfortable questions and to cut through those fairy tales designed to sugarcoat broken ideas. I urge you to actually make this a moment of truth, because that we definitely all need. And having said that, I'm looking forward to seeing many of you at the climate strike tomorrow at 1 p.m. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Louisa. No traces of hay fever was detected during your speech. I can tell you, I had to make sure there are no sponsors here in the back listed.
I
This
would
is just
have
the European
noticed.
Forum
Yeah,
Alpbach
trust me, yeah.
2024, just making sure. No, thank you for your stern words, your frank words, of course. This is what you're here for, as we say in Germany, den Finger in die Wunde zu legen, to place the finger in the wound,
Yeah.
to really make sure that your voice is being heard. On a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the most best accomplished, if you had to grade Europe's climate efforts, the EU's climate efforts, what grade would you give Europe?
Well, compared to what others do, or compared to what we should be doing?
Take both.
Well, I think it's all about the standards, right? We can look at any country and say we're better than them, and we could look at our own climate promises, say the Paris Agreement, and we find we fail drastically. We can look at our highest courts, Constitutional Court of Germany, for instance, saying it's unconstitutional what countries like Germany and Austria are doing right now. So I think it depends on the story we want to tell. We will surely get something out of that. But what is happening right now around the world is that Europe is saying, and I think we heard a bit of a similar note earlier from the finance minister, we are saying, you know, it's really nice with the climate, but we get the feeling that we're the only ones caring around the world. Can we kind of, take a break from that one and focus on the important stuff, money and stuff? And then what's happening around the world is that if we look at, say, ministers around the world, and I actually just did that for my mentioned atlas, I looked at what other ministers around the world are using as excuses not to do anything about the climate or not do enough. Turns out, wherever you go around the world, on whatever continent you are, they will look at Europe. And they say, so if Germany doesn't get away from coal, why should we? Turkish minister. They say, so if Germany is not complying to its climate targets, why should we? Minister of the Philippines. So if the West is not sticking to Paris, why should we, Foreign Minister of China? So what we're saying is what we're doing here is not just important in terms of emissions and the fact that we are ruining what we depend on. We're also providing, I promise you, they're providing excuses for everyone around the world. People aren't stupid, and they know that we have taken from the world to produce a crisis that is affecting others more than us. And now we want to kind of lay back and see where everyone else is coming in terms of their climate targets. People are not playing along, they know that. So if we are interested in providing anything like a safe future for people here or across the world, we don't just have to perform like it's the world that depends on it. We had to actively outperform anyone out there, knowing that everyone is looking at us.
Unambiguous words and demands. Europe has to lead by example in order to be a shining example to other countries and continents all around the world. Thank you, Luisa, for the time being. We will, of course, open up the discussion much more throughout. But next up, I'm delighted to welcome the next speaker here up on stage. Somebody who's very well known in this part of the world. Of course, she's a newly elected member of the European Parliament of the party NEOS, and at the EU, I've been told she's a member of the Committee on Industry, Research and Energy. So obviously a very, very important portfolio. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Anna Stück. Anna, welcome.
Bis gleich. Well, first of all, let me say thank you so much for having me. I'm very honored to be able to speak here with you and debate with you later. So, a lot can change in a year. I know it's true for me personally. 1 year ago, I just started my maternity leave, and today I'm the proud mother of the most amazing little human and a member of the European Parliament. I remember last summer watching the news, seeing reports on floodings, heat waves, mudslides, and thinking, what the hell am I doing, putting a new human in this crazy, messed up world? Maybe some of you have had this thought before. And nevertheless, I had a child, and so did many of you. Because at the end of the day, despite it all, we are about progress. We're about optimism. And we're about the hope that the next generation will live in a world that is better than today. It is about our contribution to this vision. So why does this hope and this determination not seem to apply to the climate crisis? We want our children not only to live in a better world, we want them to live better lives. And this is where we start to differ. This is where our opinions differ. So while in the last mandate, European politicians across states, across most parties, agreed upon the need for climate neutrality, we still fight over how to get there. Considering this, I think we can still be proud of what Europe achieved with the Green Deal. Again, together. But now we have to deliver, because when we choose to put children in this world, it becomes their world. And then, at least, we have to make sure that this world is preserved. But even more, I think we have to make sure that our economy, our society, our world moves forward. That's why now we cannot just pat ourselves on the back and relax. We have to implement. We have to make it happen. Ursula von der Leyen has stated that the implementation of the Green Deal needs to be done in the simplest, fairest, and most cost-efficient way. Now, I know it sounds like we can now all cross off 3 boxes of our political bullshit bingo sheet, but now is not the time to be cynical. Now is the time to act. And I have to disagree with our Finance Minister Brunner. This isn't the question of whether we should implement the Green Deal or work on our competitiveness. We cannot pin the two against each other. Rather, we need to see them as what they are, 2 sides of the same coin. When we talk about thinking economy and climate together, It is because, to a great extent, we need our economy to reach our climate goals. And it is up to climate policies to be done in a way to make sure that this economy can deliver it without collapsing. So over the next 5 years, politicians on all levels, we will have to make sure that we provide a framework that gives clear guidance and goals, but also support, because good climate policy is actually what we need for competitiveness. It is what will make us have a place in the world. But like I said, a lot can change in a year, and not only for the better. The consensus on the need for climate neutrality seems to be slowly crumbling. Across Europe, we see the rise of the far right, but also some conservatives that, out of fear of losing some votes to the right, move to that exact right. So they start, and you see it all around, you hear it all around, to pin the economy and our well-being against climate policies and the environment. And by doing so, they actually ruin both our progress towards climate neutrality and our economic prosperity. So I want to end by not only calling upon us voters to elect parties and politicians that actually take the climate crisis seriously. I want to call upon all politicians across all parties to step up and to assume the responsibility that was given to them, given to us, and stop playing with our children's world. Because even if it doesn't sound like it today and on the TV, at the end of the day, as President Reichler said, this is not about party politics. This is about nothing less than the next generation and their world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anna, thank you also for your passionate remarks. I want to pick up on what you just said about the need to reconcile the climate agenda with economic growth. When you as a parliamentarian talk to businessmen, to CEOs, what are they telling you? What seems to be the objection, the obstacle, according to them?
Well, I think there's two things to mention here, and I do, again, this isn't about party politics, but I was a bit underwhelmed by what I heard earlier, because we heard the same story again. We heard again that now is not the time to actually implement climate policies. Yes, we now have it written down, but why do we really need to do it? We should look at our competitiveness. And that's one part of the problem. One part that we hear a lot from the economy is that they say, well, there's no clear goals, there's no clarity for us, we don't know what is actually going to happen. And I think there's one good example is the ban of petrol and diesel cars in the EU. And we see here again some parties and some politicians trying to break down this agreement again. And they say it's for the economy, but actually what we hear from the economy is, well, actually, we'd quite like to have clear goals and clear standards that we can then meet. And the second thing we hear is actually something positive. Actually, just today, I was talking to some representatives from Mondi, big Austrian packaging company, and we heard earlier, packaging apparently is doing well. Well, that's great. You want to know why they're doing well? Because they've already implemented a lot of the standards that we've now put into law. So by doing that, they've actually become world leaders, global leaders, and are now exporting climate neutral or circular models and ideas. And that is how they're actually being more successful now. So can we please stop pinning and putting the economy against climate policies?
Sustainability is good business, is what you're saying at the end of the day.
Well, I think it's going to have to be. And if we look at it's always hard to single out countries, but if we look at our competitors, if we look at the US, but especially China, in Europe, we like to look at China as our big economic competitor. Well, look at what they're doing. They are building more solar panels or built in 2023 than the entire world did in 2022. They are selling more electric cars than anything else. So they are actually walking that path already. So if we don't want to be left behind by China again, then we have to implement what we're actually saying. And I agree with you that we have to be the ones implementing it in the best way, because we are exporting our climate policies, not just through soft power that you mentioned, but also through regulations. Because at the end of the day, this is a globalized world, and we have companies that work all over the world, and they will take our regulations and apply it to the rest of the world. So we have a huge role to play in this as Europe.
No doubt. And as Europe, Louisa, if we're looking at the number, the EU Green Deal, of course, has been mentioned several times here. This is some of the goals they've set forth. To be the first climate-neutral continent by 2050, and to cut net emissions by 55% by the year 2030. Not ambitious enough?
Again, this is luckily not enough, up to my personal opinion. We know that in terms of Paris, this is not what a 1.5 degree target would ask us to do. Maybe for now, it's the best thing that could have been managed around Europe. I think what is super important to mention when we talk about the Green Deal is to look at where it came from. And it very much came from the people. That was a people-powered policy. And we know that in a world of 2017 or even 2016, it would have been impossible to get something done like a Green Deal, because there weren't the majorities on the streets. There weren't the people saying we need to do more. There wasn't this really this widespread pressure from all sides. So I think especially when we talk about policies, it makes sense to acknowledge the fact that policies don't fall from heaven. They need us. They need people to work for it and to fight for it. And maybe it's not the Green Deal we want. Maybe it's the Green Deal we deserve. But now we have it, and now I think it's the next phase. Obviously, you mentioned that rightly so, that of course we see now the same voices that you always suspect to kind of crawl up their holes, to come back and to try to slow things down. I don't think it's possible anymore to really stop the green transition that is coming, but it's very much possible to slow it down drastically, to make it incredibly unjust, so it again hits the poorest and, kind of takes away the industries that already get so many of those subsidies. So of course these forces are there, but I think it's important to acknowledge movements work, activism works, people who come together and fight for something works, science in politics can work out, and you can get those cross-party majorities. It's never perfect, but I mean that's what activism really is about. It's about science fiction, making something possible that didn't exist before. So.
Clearly your remarks and this discussion has struck a nerve. We have a number of questions coming in via the app, and this is of course another reminder that this is supposed to be an interactive discussion. Keep your questions coming. Let me take one here and direct it towards you. This is from Sophie Portler. She's saying, many climate solutions require long-term planning and consistent implementation, yet political cycles often prioritize short-term goals, typically aligned with election periods of 4 or 5 years. The question is, Sophie is asking, how can we shift the focus of policymakers to adopt and sustain long-term strategies necessary for effective climate action beyond the immediate political gains? You're a politician now. This is Sophie wants an answer.
Hi, Sophie. So I think firstly, this is actually a very good reason why climate policy and climate action and the Green Deal has happened on the European level. Because European politicians, yes, they have to get re-elected as well, but that happens on the national level. When we're in Europe, we just work for Europe and we work on policy and we think more long-term than politicians on the national level can. However, I would say that this isn't only a politician's problem. I think it's a societal problem, and I think it's a problem of media and how we consume it, about the fact that whenever something gets announced, some new policy, the first thing that will happen is people will shout, oh yeah, but that's not enough, or yeah, but what about? We have a lot of whataboutism around, we have a lot of, yeah, this isn't enough, this isn't gonna help, And I think we have a lot of issues where when we implement something now, we will only see the results in 5, 10, 15, 20 years.
And may not benefit politically from it as a party.
I'm not
Exactly,
sure if
but
I would agree with that note, though. Isn't there also a certain laziness around when it comes to actually measuring positive impacts of, say, environmental regulation? Say, how long does it take for a street if you have some, say, traffic regulation? I mean, that doesn't usually happen on a European level, but in terms of combustion engines, it kind of does. So how long does it take to a street to get significantly quieter, for people to sleep better? We know the numbers. We know that better sleep increases concentration. It increases the well-being of city spaces and so on. It takes an hour. You know, the cars are there, they aren't there. It doesn't take 10 years for any regulation. How long does it take for there to be much less cars? Maybe that's a year, but I would say there is a tendency in politics, and I would really put it there, it's a broad tendency across parties even, to very closely monitor whatever is happening on stock markets. We get that every night, we get it everywhere, we get it in push messages, we get it everywhere. When it comes to really closely measuring, you know, the diversity of impacts, not only, say, on air pollution, but really looking at noise levels in streets, on really how well are our soils doing. That might be happening at some university, but it's clearly not used to communicate with the public, to make it our issue to say, our soils are dying, let's talk about it, and how did this regulation maybe increase the well-being of the soils we depend on. What I'm saying is, I think the assumption that politics is happening a certain way, it's always on the short gains. And in climate, this doesn't work out. I think we are biased when talking about this.
But actually, I think what your point is actually supporting what I was trying to say, which is that we have become, or maybe always have been, numb to people telling us, well, this will happen and this will get better, and this is, people need to see the change in order to actually say, oh yeah, this was a good idea, this was a good change. And your example of a street, I think, you know, we can make it more concrete. We're here in Austria. If we look at Vienna, for example, I see some representatives from the Green Party. I remember the debate about the Marie-Hilfer-Straße and making it into a pedestrian zone. There was huge outcry. People didn't want this to happen at all. People said, you know, oh, we'll never vote for the Greens here again. Well, guess what? It was implemented because the people voted for it, by the way, you know, thank you to the people. And it was implemented and now everyone loves it. And you can see that, at least locally, the Green politicians who did it are now actually gaining votes because of that work. But it's something that is seen. When you look at things that take more time, it's a lot harder to convince people to say, you know what? This will take time. Please bear with us. We promise you this will happen, and here are the numbers. Here are the studies. Here's the science, because we actually do look at science in politics as well. Here's the science. Here are the numbers. Please trust us. It doesn't work anymore. There is no trust in politics, in policies, in media, and this is something that we all need to fight together.
That's true.
Absolutely. I think you're both in the same boat here. Let me go through some of more questions, because obviously the list keeps growing, and the good thing is, for me as a moderator, you can actually vote on the popularity of each question, so I know which one they want me to ask. Here's an interesting one to both. Peter Bruck is asking, both speakers, Joanna and Luisa, you both represent parties which sit at 10% or below in the opinion polls. Why is that? How do they explain the very limited voter supports, judging by the importance and relevance of the subject matter you both presented today? Why is this not more urgent politically, Luisa?
I mean, for me, that's easy, because I'm like a passive member of the Green Party in Germany, but I don't do anything. I don't have any position there. I don't decide what they do. And I think when it comes to Germany, we heard a very good analysis of what is going wrong in German politics, and I can completely understand if people are fed up. I think you kind of vaguely mentioned it right now. You made a really important point of it, the kind of new wave of anti-climate populism arising, really without any decency anymore, coming honestly from the German Liberal Party, which I think is quite a different party to the Austrian Neos in that terms. So I think to the dispense of really the trust in politics, we hear certain parties in Germany, these are some parties that know who they are, who really come around and spread lies about green policies, about green politicians. So that's a disaster, I think, not just for a party, but for a democracy. And I think when it comes to Germany, though, we see a quite dysfunctional government by now, mainly because there are 3 different parties who thought if everyone does their business, all businesses are being served. And that's not working out when, our finance strategy is our security strategy, because this is about importing fossil fuels from Putin or not. It doesn't work out when our foreign policy is suddenly our peace policy or our climate policy. If everything is interlinked, you have to find a common denominator. And if you can't do that as a government, or if you don't have a chancellor who kind of has that vision, doesn't work out. Which again would be a very fair point for saying innovation in climate isn't just about technologies. It's about innovating a political culture that allows us to exist around parties without ending by 0-0 all the time and kind of taking everything and everyone down with you, including the trust in democracy.
And the very crucial upcoming state elections in Germany, of course, next month might put another dent in the bucket there for the Green Party. Same question to you, of course. The question of Peter is, if we all agree here in this room, and perhaps we want a clean planet, we want a green planet, we want to live sustainably, but at the same time it's not reflected in the polls of the parties that first and foremost stand for these issues. How to explain that, and what is the recipe?
Well, I'm not sure, because I've always voted for NEOS, but no, in all seriousness, I think I want to turn the question around, because we are so used, and in Austria especially, and I think this question kind of shows it as well, we are a multi-party country. But in our heads, it's still very much a 2-party system. Our entire country is still divided into 2 parties. And so in our heads, it's only the big parties that matter. But we live in a democracy. And we live in a democracy where we have coalitions. So also smaller parties can have an impact and a say, because they represent part of this country. And I maybe want to pick up on something that President Treichel said earlier, about the bad compromises. I think the problem is that they aren't compromises, what is being done in Germany. It's, I don't know the English word for it, but Kuhhandel. It's Kuhhandel rather than compromises. Because if we look at what is happening is, actually, if we found compromise between the different parties, I think every party has its strengths. And if we looked at all the strengths, and if we would let everyone win, as you said, we would have the best policies possible. But instead, it's always about winning for yourself rather than for the country, rather than for Europe and for us as a world. And I think that is a problem.
I might add, I find it a huge embarrassment for any party that isn't associated with solving the most existential crisis of our times. Like literally, like grow up, I would say. If you're a party that people don't expect to be able to solve the environmental issues that attack and threaten all of us, like what are you doing? And I think it's a disastrous situation that we would sit around in 2024 and find that in countries that matter so much, you would find certain parties that people don't trust with protecting what we all need. Maybe that's a root problem here.
Anna, here's a question, most voted question, so obviously many people want desperately an answer to that. Katharina Rogenhofer is asking, Austria spends 5.7 billion euros on counterproductive subsidies. Will your party commit to abolish these subsidies if they will get a chance to be part of the next government in Austria?
Woo! Fine. I was thinking earlier I should be faster and quicker in answering, so this one is very easy, 100% yes.
No.
Someone write that down, please.
Furkan Yüksel is asking Luisa, if the technology isn't here yet, why are we still talking about the idea of endless economic growth on a planet with finite resources?
Sorry, what's the beginning of the question?
If the technology isn't here yet, why are we still talking about the idea of endless economic growth on a planet with finite resources? Something you can certainly concur with.
The endless economic growth meaning classic GDP depletion of resources and so on, that's like it's a religion and they last long, they tend to last long. That's easy, but I don't think that the technology isn't here yet. Technologies are here. We just struggle to implement most of them. And instead of like looking at what's good and solid and working out, people make it a culture war, and especially certain parties make it. Imagine the heat pump was invented earlier than the gas heater, but didn't make enough money, so they went for the gas heater. The first car that was invented was an electric car. Didn't make enough money, they went for the combustion engine. So I'm not even saying we need new technology. Sometimes it's looking back, and looking beyond the lobby interests circling around fossil fuel technologies. Because we find out we have great technologies on all levels. Not all of them, finished to the last point, but we have the basics. What we do not have are politicians or parties or enough of the public to stand up against the fossil fuel industries who are defending their old ideas and trying to sell us bullshit. But this is much more a question of inventing ways to stand up to those power structures than a question of inventing new technologies. And I think what we see in Europe around the combustion engine is a wonderful example of that. Beautiful new technology. Few people know that, but there's actually the opposite of innovation is exnovation. Few people know this word because we do it so rarely, but exnovation is crucial. To say goodbye to old ideas, to exnovate means making space for new ideas. But if you only, if you want to innovate new stuff without saying goodbye to old ideas, to gas heaters or to combustion engines, not from today to tomorrow, but at some point, if you never exnovate, it's just getting really cramped and everyone is stuck in a traffic jam, quite literally sometimes. So I would say, let's look at the great stuff that we have and look at who is hindering us from implementing that. And I would say in terms of wind turbines, beautiful technology we can start right away, here.
Well, there you have it. Anna, the mantra of leaving no one behind, being all-inclusive when it comes to sustainability is, of course, a sentence that politicians love to use. Noreen Mughal is actually asking, according to that, she says, we only brushed the topic that a lot of the implementation of climate-friendly policies being especially hard on people that aren't as fortunate in our society. And she would like to hear, speak you more about that, elaborate a bit more on how to bring those people on board. How is this benefiting everyone?
So I think this is, again, a coin with two sides. There's a twofold answer. The one is that we can and have to make sure that we directly support people who are hit hard by climate policies through social support, etc. But the second thing is that we need to make sure that the climate policies that we actually do implement, we have a choice of who it's going to hurt. And there's some, and very important part, that everyone will benefit from, and that is the topic of energy. Because when we talk about renewables, when we talk about making our energy climate neutral, then we actually talk about making energy cheaper. And this is something that would benefit everyone, not just because it would be cheaper for us to heat our homes, to turn on our TVs and whatnot, but actually every single product would become cheaper because energy costs would be lower. So I think there's a lot to be said there, and then also make things simpler. When we then talk about maybe not the day-to-day, but other things like, for example, the railway, as we've again heard before, by actually managing or making a European railway network, we could make it cheaper for every single person to use that network. So I think there's a lot of policies that we can implement that can actually make our lives better and cheaper. This is not saying that we don't also need support, but this is to say that this is, I think, a twofold response, I guess.
We're in the final stretches of this discussion round, a third and very pertinent one on multilateralism and the new global world order is following right after this. So just a few minutes. Let me ask you, Luisa, you have, of course, and rightfully pointed out some companies, some countries who are not doing a good job, who must do more.
Yes.
Perhaps this is a good opportunity for you to also issue some praise. Who gets it? I mean, you travel around the world. Which are the countries, which are the companies that do get it, that are leading by example?
I just asked you for
Exactly.
a controversial question.
There you
That's
have
what
it.
you come up with. Okay.
Well, that's not the controversial one. The controversial one's
Okay.
right after that.
Oh, yeah, okay. So, I mean, there are countries who are doing better than others. I mean, a global leadership is with Costa Rica, probably.
Yeah.
One of the things that Costa Rica did is linking biodiversity and climate protection, which is like beautiful. And they got their problems better solved in terms of farming than Europe does, because they actually managed to tell the people some kind of truth about the farming, that if we have great farming that works for the farmers and the planet, you know, everyone wins. And if you do a farming structure that is really just providing a lot of money for some very big agricultural companies, well, most of us don't win. Then in Europe, there's Portugal, which is leading on a few things. And there, I would say, in terms of climate, there's a tendency to look for those big, bold leaders, and I would say oftentimes they're super small, and some utopia still is already around. We just have to look closely. I would say every single village that has great connections with public transport, that has some agricultural systems around where people directly benefit, that has renewable infrastructure and strategy, every single of those villages is some kind of leader, some kind of utopia when it comes to what needs to be done. And they're oftentimes not on the great big stages. I mean, there are great examples of schools that figure out how to do their school meals sustainably, while educating kids about health and diets. I think there are even some examples around Austria, which is so big compared to the big culture that, you know, used to be around for so long. So I would think looking for leaders in climate doesn't need to be like the big rankings on the big scales. We do also need them, but I find much more inspiring really looking closely and taking ourselves seriously. And I mean, we see the studies that show us if you walk by a solar panel every day, you will be significantly more likely to install a solar panel yourself if you have the means to do that. Which means everyone who does install a solar panel is, you know, doing much more than just providing energy for themselves. So we know that whatever we do, it has an impact. If we don't do anything as a country or as an individual or as a politicians, we also do something because we are a bad example. We are normalizing inaction. We are normalizing cynicism. So there isn't really, there isn't really this neutral spot. But as soon as you get something done, you know, other things will happen too.
I know, Luisa, we're almost out of time, but I want to give you the opportunity to respond to those, and of course, they respond to you on Twitter or leave a remark who say there's no point in vilifying people who may not be as fast as you, you know, in terms of achieving the goal. Their conditions, their work conditions, life conditions do not permit as such. They says, I need a car to get to want to be. Public transportation is not here. I still need to work in this particular sector. I mean, there's still people who may in their heart would agree with you, but they're saying, look, what you are proposing is all is all good, is all nice, but at the end of the day, it does not reflect my lifestyle. I still have to work. I still have to put food on the table. What do you respond to these people? I mean, you know them. They are commenting and engaging with you in discussions, both of you.
Actually, during the election campaign, had a young, I'd say 16-year-old boy. He said to me, you know, climate is important to me, but I don't want to feel bad when I fly to my family in the UK to visit them. And I hear that, but that's not, or it shouldn't be what it is about. And I guess my real answer is that is what our job is, to make sure that the framework is there for you to live your life in a climate positive way without ruining it. You know, this is what what we should be here for and what we all should be working for together, because at the end of the day, it's a joint effort from politics, society, activists, the economy, businesses. And we have to agree that this is our goal and that we want to work towards that. And once we've agreed on that, then there's nothing stopping us.
Luisa?
Yes, I don't think, I rarely would hear politicians or activists vilifying people. Like, we vilify companies and banks and investors and sometimes politicians and grüezi, servus, hallo. But we don't, I think the vilifying of the people doesn't come from politics or activism so much. It comes, I would say, much more from the assumption that this is being done. It's a bit of the vegan effect, you know, this moment when you have dinner and there's one vegan in the room, and before that vegan person said anything, everyone around the table would say, oh, I couldn't do it, oh, the proteins, no, this can't be healthy. That vegan doesn't say a single word, but everyone goes home and says, damn, those vegan always have to talk about veganism, right? So, you know, we know this. And I think this is a bit happening when it comes to car riding, even if no one would talk about it, just any politician out there saying we need more public transport would lead to people say, oh no, they want to take away our cars again. So I would think...
Yeah, because it's being perceived
I mean, the point is, of course, the point you made is completely right. This is about providing the chances for people to actually live a sustainable life. Luckily enough, that can be done, but it's, I think, also looking closely at where those narratives are actually coming from and, you know, making sure that we tell the stories that need to be told. I would just say one thing. Why do we vilify companies, etc.? Because we are in an era of greenwashing that might be the most dangerous thing that has yet happened to the climate discourse. Greenwashing isn't just sugarcoating your dirty businesses. Greenwashing might actually actively disable or disengage others from doing something because they think that job has been done already. Whether this is frauding consumers or voters or someone investing with you or whoever, this is not just misleading people, but this is misleading action. And I don't think we're yet aware of what that wave is really about, how companies everywhere and investors and banks are trying to be something they're clearly not while continuing their business that is driving us nowhere. And I would be so embarrassed as a company in Euros finding that the EU has to actually introduce laws that stop me from lying to my own consumers. Like, where's the decency gone? Like, since when was it so normal to lie to the public and actively, you know, have some laws around that stopping me? What are we, third grade? I think this is ridiculous. And just to say one thing, we talked about it. There is a great economic case for climate action. There are majorities for this. And there's even the policy ideas and the technologies. If all of that didn't exist, constitutionally, our governments would still have to introduce climate targets and stick to those. So yes, we are lucky because we have all that. So how stupid could we be not to go for it? But it's not that we need to have a certain majority in a country to agree that we need climate action. It's just making everyone's lives, especially of the governments, easier. So I would say we have everything that we need. The only thing stopping us is us.
The only one that's stopping us is us.
And the clock.
As you can see, the clock is mercilessly telling us to wrap up. Thank you so much. I think it goes without saying that your voices, both of you and your generations, will become more important, not less, as time progresses. And of course, best of luck in your work in the European Parliament. And Luisa, of course, best of luck with your book, but more importantly, of course, with your work as a political activist, being one of the leading voices in your generation.
Yes, and see you tomorrow, right? 1 p.m. Climate strike.
Well, there you have it. Don't miss out on it. Luisa, Anna, thank you so much. This is your applause. So much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very much looking forward to the next pair of speakers, truly heavyweights, intellectuals who have left their marks on international politics, and of course the new global world order. Everything we've talked about with Anna and Luisa, climate, is of course very much dependent on how the world evolves. And we have two individuals here who can shed light on how and where the world is heading. First up, he's the president of the Observer Research Foundation, India's premier think tank, headquartered in New Delhi with affiliates in the US and Middle East. Delighted to welcome him to Albach, ladies and gentlemen. Please welcome Samir Saran.
How are you doing, my friend? Look, I must tell you that I'm a vegetarian. And I'm taking a long flight back home. I'm flying too. And I completely agree with literally the sentiments expressed, each of the sentiment expressed in the previous panel. In fact, before I decided to turn my attention to the simple task of multilateralism, my PhD was on climate policy. And I used to spend a lot of time agonizing over two important aspects that were brought out by the previous speakers. One, why is the world silent when the single biggest stakeholder has not signed the Paris Agreement? The banks and the private sector have not signed the Paris Agreement, and they are the biggest polluters. And until governments around the world learn to make them keel, we are not going to progress on climate. We have to bring the companies and the banks onto the table and make them sign the Paris Agreement and make them commit to a climate positive future. Governments and citizens can keep making a noise until then. They hold the keys to the kingdom and they are not willing to part with it. It has to be snatched. The problem is multilateralism has failed and governance in nations have failed. We have become too used to giving incentives to corporations, carrots to corporations, rather than the sticks that we need to wield to sometimes ensure good behavior. Regulation must be tough because we are, as was rightly pointed out, facing an existential crisis, a planetary crisis where the planet is angry. This is the biggest battlefield. Planet Earth is angry with us. It is hitting back, and places in my part of the world are actually bearing the burden already. 6% of Indian GDP is adaptation and loss and damage every year. We are paying the price for your growth. We will pay the price for our growth too. We have to make sure that we act together and in concert. And as someone in Africa once pointed out, that Europe's climate mitigation strategy, Europe's Green Deal, cannot be our permanent poverty. So we have to find a way of bringing fresh capital into industries and into sectors that will be both climate positive and uplift 6 billion people who were left out of the mainstream in this current stage of globalization. This globalization is Europe and Americas. If some of us have benefited, it is because you didn't want us to. We just got there. I call myself white adjacent. I just stuck close to you and I walked in as well. But it was not designed for our benefits. It was designed for your benefits. And that is my first proposition for the global order today. The global order has failed, spectacularly so, and Russia's invasion of Ukraine, its occupation and its decision to reshape the map in Europe is but the final nail in that coffin. If we are truly honest, every 5 of the P5 members in this century have violated the territorial integrity of one country or another. Each one of them has in many ways been in breach of the most sacred of covenants of the rules-based order of 1945. That was territorial integrity. We have done it under the garb of taking democracy to the world, of civilizing the East, or whatever format you want to choose. But the fact is, we have violated the basic principle of the rules-based order that borders were sacrosanct. And of course, this is the current episode in Europe is perhaps one of the most vicious and brutal manifestations of the complete disregard of the apex of global governance of the world order, the P5, to the rules-based order that we so dearly want to preserve somehow. There's a crisis of credibility, and unless the UNSC and the UN reform dramatically, it is better that they wither away and die. and something else replace it. The P5 is a glaring continuation of the colonial project. The colonizers and their allies occupy those 5 positions. And of course, I'm talking about what it was in 1945. 52 countries were independent and were able to participate in the process. 140-odd countries were not even present. And yet, you want everyone to sign on to that project. So we have to rethink a complete revamp and reform of the international system as we know it if we want mass participation and mass buy-in into a global project. We will fail the planet, we will fail the poor, we will not be able to respond adequately to the healthcare challenges that we face, for example, during the pandemic. We will fail in our duties as being leaders, as being citizens, as being responsible individuals, unless we have this overhaul of the international order that was framed post the big war in Europe and had basically the Europeans and Americans deciding its course and trajectory and direction. It was not a bad order, by the way. I suspect if all of us were to sit down and come up with a formula, it might be very similar, don't get me wrong. But participation matters. Participation in the process matters, and those who are left out will always have a distance from that particular project. So don't get me wrong, the content may not be wrong, but its creation is terribly flawed. And it's time to bring in others and make them co-owners of this global project. My second point. We have lost, and thank you, Andreas, you touched my heart with your speech. War has become a favorite method of communication today. When we disagree, we fight. Conflict has become okay within countries, and wars has become okay across countries. And Andreas, when you said that let's have a debate, let's discuss, let's have an open conversation, I couldn't agree more. We sit in rarefied silo chambers, even in multilateral institutions. And that is the tragedy of multilateralism, that our multilateralism is with people like us and not the fundamental offering of multilateralism, which was to reach out to people who were not like us. Multilateralism has also been reduced to clubs. It is now clublateralism with a few countries that align on certain issues engaging with each other, rather than being a forum where disagreements are voiced, appreciated, challenged, and some common framework for all of us could be adopted. Multilateralism has failed as an open chamber for conversations and disagreements. And thank you for creating a forum that allows that. The third, financial governance. Financial multilateralism. Financial multilateralism is very important to understand because it was designed at a time when the focus was on rebuilding Europe and the countries ravaged by the war, and it was obviously perpetuated because those were the geographies that were creating the largest growth. Our financial governance and financial multilateralism was designed to cater to Europe and to cater to the US and to some of their allies in East Asia and other parts of the world. They were the growth engines of the world. Today, 60% of global growth comes from the emerging and developing countries. 60%. 1/3 from China, 15% from India, and add the others, and you get 2/3 of global growth coming from these new geographies. The Paris Club is still a European and American affair. The purse strings are still controlled by those sitting in this room and their friends in high places. Financial multilateralism will not allow us to put adequate money to respond to climate change in the global south. 80% of climate finance remains at home. It does not leave the borders of the country where it has its origins. 80% of future emissions comes from the global south. Unless you can move that money to where you can actually stop those emissions, you're not going to be able to succeed. So financial multilateralism is failing us, failing humanity in its endeavors, either on the development goals or on its climate goals. So my view, we need a complete reform and a reconceptualization of the world that should manage us. The global order is caught between a big power struggle, US and China and others. We need to move out of those struggles. We need to have sensible voices in the room and rethink of a plan where everyone can have a stake in it. And of course, during the conversation, I will heartily disagree with Carl Bildt. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you.
Let's come up.
As you wish.
Okay.
Thank you so much, Samir. And before you disagree with Carl, let me just ask you a quick follow-up question. You've already pointed out multilateralism is dead. We're seeing less cooperation all around the world, more nationalism, more conflicts, and the inefficiency, if you will, of international organizations. This is, of course, one of the most prominent forums on the future of Europe. You are based in India, a nation that is fast rising in terms of power and influence. If you're looking at Europe, the view from New Delhi, if you will, what do you see? You see a failing continent?
Look, we see in Europe our future partner. Our future partner for building together sensible regulations for the explosion of the digital society that India has become. I don't think the Americans are interested in regulation, right? And we will have to, we signed the Trade and Technology Council arrangement with the EU a couple of years ago at Raisina Dialogue, or during that visit of Ursula von der Leyen. So I believe in EU we see a partner in the digital future. Sensible regulation that protects people, that allows people to climb the ladder, that prevents the perverse use of our data and private spaces for the benefit of corporates, or for being gamed by those who want to harm democracy and plural society. So I think it's both ways. So that's the first thing. I think a EU-India partnership is essential for that future. Second, our green transitions has to have EU at its heart. Otherwise, we are literally underwriting Beijing's expansionism. If India does not see a vibrant EU, provide the solutions for the hydrogen future, for cheap solar energy, batteries, and everything else, technology and R&D hubs are here. And the market is here, the hunger is here, the aspiration is here. We have to make the two meet. So Europe and India are going to have to be partners in the green project, because otherwise we will have political repercussions of funding a non-liberal actor who is the only green shop in town today. If you want to go green, you have to go to Beijing. That's the challenge here. And I think we must have more shops. I'm not saying exclude China, they're very important, but they cannot have the veto over our futures. And I think they must not have the ability to stop the progress because they may not like our political ideologies, or they may not like our decisions at a certain point of it. So second is green. And the third and the most important, I think you must understand, globalization as we know it is over. Let's be honest here. And good, because it burned the planet, it kept 6 billion people poor, and it served very few people. So I'm glad globalization as it exists today is over. But the new format for integration is going to be born from the same 4 water bodies that have created every round of global integration. I always tell people that humans came together because of 3 factors: the Mediterranean and the Red Sea, the Arabian Sea, and that magic called monsoon. That's how globalization was born. That's where it was born from. And if we need to build a 21st century new model of globalization that is responsible, sensitive, inclusive, we will have to have the Mediterranean and Atlantic system merged with the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. So the Indo-Pacific and the Med-Atlantic, countries that actually have stake in these 4 water bodies, are going to be the future of the new system that must serve all of us.
So thank you, Samir, for these stark words and warnings as well. A very passionate plea for India and European cooperation. Now I'm delighted to welcome on stage somebody who has shaped European politics for many, many years as a politician, but also as a think tanker. He's, of course, the former Prime Minister of Sweden and the current co-chairman of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Here he is, Carl Bildt.
And I guess my task here is to tear some here to pieces. But before doing that, just a couple of remarks on global order. First, to recognize that global order is a fairly recent concept. There was nothing of the sort until roughly 100 years ago. there wasn't a global community, there wasn't a global order. The global order has been an attempt to set up something during the last century. The first major attempt was, of course, made in Versailles after the First Global War. That was an utter failure for a number of different reasons. It was an extremely ambitious project, and it failed, and we know the consequences of that. The second attempt to set up a global order came, of course, in 1945. And we was building on the experience of the failure of the first. And there are three elements of it that I think were decisive coming out of the failure of the first attempt. The first was to set up the Security Council, which we sometimes vilify and sometimes dislike, because you have these five, you have the veto powers, they stop things. But the experience of the First Order was that if you don't have the big powers there, they will sooner or later wreck the entire thing. So the Security Council and the 5 permanent members and the veto rights, sort of uncomfortable, but it worked. Second, what happened during the interwar period, primarily in Europe, but all over the crowds, was the collapse of the global economy. The 1930s was horrible. Trade protectionism, all sorts of things were building up, and that did contribute not only to economic despair, but also to political conflict. So there was set up the Bretton Woods institution to take that sort of World Bank and IMF and what later, a couple of decades later, became the World Trade Organization, to make certain that we get a global economy that can work in some sort of way. Some here can say it was done by the West. It was done by the West, true, because it was a word dominated by the West at the time. And the third element was, of course, decolonization. The previous word, before the global order, was a word of empires and colonies. The empires collapsed, and the colonies were unsustainable. And if we now look at the record of that sort of post-1945 period of global order, was it good, was it bad, did it succeed, did it fail? Well, one thing we easily tend to forget is that in 1945, there was invented the nuclear weapon. And for decades, the main threat hanging over mankind was the threat of an all-out nuclear war. None of us would have been here if that would have happened. You can discuss why it was prevented, but it was prevented. We avoided the global catastrophe of a global nuclear war. Nuclear weapons are still around. We tend to forget that, but we avoided that. Decolonization happened. There are now 193 members of the United Nations. That's a rather sort of uncomfortable number, because to manage that particular crowd is somewhat less than easy. Particularly if you go to global bodies where Samir said everyone should have a voice. I agree in principle, but in Paris agreements and the climate agreement, you need 193 individual governments to agree on the same sort of thing. That's not an easy thing to manage. But of course, decolonization was a good thing. Now, 1945 is, I don't need to remind you of that, a long time ago. And the world has changed in fairly fundamental ways, in the sense that we have overcome the wars. Europe, that destroyed itself, has been rebuilt. Japan is back as a thriving democracy. Particularly during the last few decades, we've had sort of a booming global economy that has lifted lots of people out of poverty. My number one figure that I always use is that in a quarter of a century, we cut child mortality in half. That's not a bad thing in terms of what has been achieved by this sometimes vilified globalization. But power has shifted fundamentally. The rise of China is the most dramatic, of course, but not only one. Power structures are fundamentally different. And now we are in a much more challenging situation. We have significantly rising geopolitical tensions. Don't need to point out the obvious ones. Samir mentioned the Russian aggression against Ukraine. It's not the only thing, but it's one of the most significant. It's fueled, by the way, by fossil fuel. If Russia wasn't able to export its oil and its gas, it couldn't finance the bombs and the artillery and the soldiers. So it's an aggression financed by fossil fuel. We have the significant rise of China-US tensions. Can these two major powers manage their disagreements without that leading to a war that could easily get nuclear and could easily destroy the global economy? And then, somewhat closer to us, the Middle East. Remember the Arab Spring, somewhat more than a decade ago. If you look at the social and economic conditions of most of the Middle East, of North Africa today, it is worse than it was prior to the Arab Spring. Is this a sustainable order in the vicinity of Europe? Hardly. What's going to happen there? That's going to be a part of the rising tensions. And then at the same time, and we see this reflected, of course, in a Security Council that can't agree on things and all of the disagreements that you see on the global stage. And at the same time, we have rising demands for global governance. Global governance has become significantly more difficult and become significantly more necessary. We discussed climate, fairly obvious. Biodiversity. We need to have everyone around the table, all of the 193, to do this. Not an easy thing to do. Health. We survived a pandemic, barely. But huge issues of equity and other issues that we've not sorted out quite well. Are we prepared for the next pandemic? We are not. We don't have the global structure in place to handle a pandemic that would be worse than the comparatively mild one that was COVID. And we know something is coming there. Again, we need everyone around the table. And then Samir alluded to that, the digital issues. AI and all of that are fundamentally new things that are happening. And we need to have some rules of the road, some governance, call it whatever, to handle the security challenges that are coming there. And there we need also everyone to sit around the table. So that's where we are. Global governance hasn't done too badly, certainly not perfect. It's become significantly more difficult when tensions are rising all over the world, but it has become significantly more necessary. A month from now, the leaders of the world are going to meet in New York for what is called the Summit of the Future, called by the Secretary General. And at that time, all of this will be sorted out. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I like your optimism, Carl.
Yeah. You have to end on that.
You know, at that height, the world is different.
Absolutely. Yeah. Carl, let me just follow up quickly. We are here at the Alpa Forum, of course, talking about the future of Europe, but around Europe, a completely new order is establishing. Some call it the Global South. We have BRICS, of which very, very aspiring, ambitious countries are coming together despite their differences. Europe, that is at least the reading on the part of analysts, Europe is losing relevance in the international global order. Would you concur with that notion?
I'm not quite certain they were losing, but others are gaining. Is that a good or a bad thing? Is it a good or bad thing that India is rising? Of course it's a good thing. Does that mean that in relative terms Europe is somewhat losing? Yes, it does. But you should more see it as others are rising than Europe is losing. But of course the end result is that if we go back to sort of 100 years ago, it was a European-dominated world. The Americans were rising, but Europe was still the dominating power. Now we are not. Good or bad? Of course, the world is a big place. I think we are, correct me if I got the figures, I think we are 7% of the global population or something like that. So we can't really expect to be dominating the entire world. We do it somewhat less now than we did 150 years ago. I think that's probably a good thing. Samir would agree necessarily, but
please feel free to chime in.
I love the doubts he has about that.
Well, I think the doubts are well founded, but no. But of course, the 20th century very much dominated by the United States. Certainly after '45, I think no one would be arguing against that. I think everybody would be foolish to count out the United States now, despite the domestic turmoil they may be going through right now. But it is clear, Samir, that it's not going to be that one country in the 21st century no longer dominating all global affairs, is it?
Look, multilateralism as we know it was a project that was designed based on a fundamental central pillar of that design. That you would have either two big powers managing different spheres of influence, and that was the early part of the post-1945 order, or you would have unipolarity, the Pax Americana, the 90s and the early 2000s, where one single power became responsible for both enforcing its writ, but also rewarding good behavior. So either you had a world of two superpowers or of one superpower for pretty much till the financial crisis. I would take 2007-8 as a time when the world of these two different textures collapsed. The financial crisis gave birth to multipolarity, where a number of rising powers began to, in fact, let me just remind you, in 2013 or 12, I'm forgetting the exact date, but the BRICS countries, including my country, we gave $5 billion, India gave $5 billion of support for the Greek economic meltdown. And I think the BRICS committed $50 billion totally amongst themselves to bail out what was then called the PIGS countries, the PIGS, Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. I think there were these 5 countries. So BRICS and PIGS were like the moment when the world changed upside down, right? That was then. But a lot has happened after that. And the most remarkable change post that particular period is that many of the frontrunners, such as China, have faced terrible headwinds in the last 5 years. There is no certainty of the China story today like there was 5 years ago. 5 years ago, it was destined to be the largest country in nominal terms and extend that lead dramatically in the coming decades. I think that China certainty is over. We have seen it faltering, we have seen it recovering, but we have seen it now pretty much tapering to how big economies move towards, which is modest growth rates and uncertain futures. It is exporting its surpluses to the world, and the world, once it gets its own industrial policy right, China will be in trouble. And China will be watching the November elections very closely. The second thing that has happened, which is again was not written on the books, was the remarkable rise of America as an economic giant. The growth rate in America is outstanding over the last few years. And by the way, I'm not being partisan. I think Trump, Biden, let them decide their president.
Yeah.
But I think you're right. It's Kamala Harris. But someone just told me no matter who wins, India rules. So on both sides we have a nice Indian influence. But having said that, now the point is America has shown remarkable resilience in becoming this very important agent of transformation. Its big platforms, especially in the digital age, dominate the world. By miles, there is no second country around it. Its critical technologies are, again, space age, and others are still struggling on Terra Nova. The Chinese are beginning to challenge them somewhat. But I think the idea that America is disappearing is exaggerated. America is here to stay for a very long time, certainly my lifetime. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if you were to see in some odd sort of a way, post this crazy decade that we are in, where all our big democracies are struggling to find a new social contract to manage our differences, you could pretty much see America power ahead in the 30s. I see America with their demographic continued emphasis on migration and attracting talent from around the world, continued vibrancy of its entrepreneurship and innovation, power ahead. So America is not gone by a long distance. Now in Europe, I think the big question is that are you truly a union? And my answer is you are not. My answer is that you are a union in terms of the swag, but when it comes to content, there is no union. It is each country for itself. So yes, the swagger is there. Oh yeah, we are EU, we are 27. No, you are one of 27 when you're sitting in a particular country, when you're competing for a defense contract, when you're trying to bail out a country which requires climate funds. You don't have the muscles and the weight to be influential. So I think that the capital market union that you're talking about, the defense union that you must think about, the energy union that has to be inevitable, these three things, unless these three things happen in the next 5 to 7 years, you will have some European countries that will play an important role, but EU as an actor will be relegated to the sidelines. So Europeans, no, but EU, yes, unless you think about a capital markets union where you bring your financial muscle together. I mean, imagine you are fighting a $2 trillion economy on your Eastern Front, a $2 trillion economy, and you hear reports, and maybe they are wrong, Carl, and you can correct me, but you hear reports that the production capacities of Russia are outperforming production capacities in Europe. It's kind of ridiculous when you think about the fact that you are not able to bring yourselves together and defeat the invader. Now don't get me wrong, Russia has been a dear friend of our country and we have a history and a legacy with them, and I'm not in any ways pointing out, but let me just tell you, 20th century and 21st century have both been witness to the fact that when big countries with nuclear weapons have invaded other countries, they have lost those wars. They've been beaten by conventional action on the battlefield, and I have no doubt they will be if you guys get your house and your act together. Don't blame Trump, don't blame India, fight the damn war.
Yeah. Thank you. Carl, very stern words from
Not stern,
Samir.
Listen, I'm egging you on.
Well,
I want Europe to rise.
Well, that's... Yes, it's criticism veiled as a compliment. Yes, it's. But you do it so well, Samir. So I'm going to let it slide. No, but clearly, I mean, I think once again he's putting the finger in the wound here and saying what Europe should do. As somebody who has been at the forefront of European politics, what would you reply?
Well, we have to look at the world as it is and look at, Samir mentioned other powers. I mean, there's no question that the United States has solidified its position as the innovation superpower of the world. They are truly leading the innovation race. Much more than I think we thought 10 or 15 years ago. We have to take that into account. China is the production superpower of the world. They have an immense industrial production capability. And it's not because they're subsidizing things, they do. But it's primarily because they are bloody competent in doing it. Samir is saying, I think is right, they are heading into headwinds, significant headwinds. I would argue that those headwinds are primarily in the making of the Chinese themselves. Correct. If you take, I mean, look at this, there's a small place called Taiwan, roughly 20 million people. It's an island that has nothing. I mean, it's nothing. There's no natural resources whatsoever. But they have 20 million Chinese. And if the 1.3 billion Chinese on the mainland were to achieve the productivity of the 20 million of Taiwan, then we are in trouble.
Correct.
And China did make enormous progress by liberalizing the talent of the Chinese for a couple of decades. Now the political system is moving in another direction and China is slowing down. But we should not underestimate the potential that is there if they could do the other Chinese what the Taiwanese have done. India, of course, now bigger than China in terms of population. India and China started at roughly the same level. Today, the Chinese economy is 5 times the Indian economy.
In 1980, we were the same size.
Yeah, but now what India has is, of course, an enormous surplus of talent. And what you see, I mean, it's striking if you go to the US and California. They're invaded by the Indians. Very many of the leading companies of the digital transformation are headed by brilliant people coming out of the Indian universities. So India is beginning to develop in a somewhat new way. So where are we Europeans in this? If US is the innovation superpower, China is the production superpower, we are sometimes the regulation superpower. That's fine. and Samir was appreciated of the efforts that we're making. They're necessary, but it's not enough. We need to be more of an innovation power. We need to look at the powers that we have in the world. With trading. I mean, don't forget, we trade as much as the Chinese and the Americans taken together.
Correct.
We are the #1 trading power of the world. And why are we that? Because we have products. We have things that are demanded by the rest of the world. But we need to upgrade that. And we need to be open. I mean, there's been a tendency in the European debate that trade is difficult and dangerous and whatever. It is trade and the openness to the world that has made Europe what it is. And we must not forget that. And here the European Union is not a federal entity in everything, but we have a federal trade policy. There's no Swedish trade policy, there's no Austrian trade policy, there's a European trade policy. And if we can be somewhat more offensive on that, I think that is also very important, because the Americans don't have a trade policy. They forgot about that. They don't dislike trade suddenly. The Chinese know how to trade. But if you're not going to leave the word to the Chinese, we Europeans must step up our efforts of trading with the world. Africa, which is the rising continent. I mean, the year 2000, which is not that long ago, there were 500 million Europeans and 500 million people in Africa. Today, there are more than 1 billion. In a couple of decades, there will be 5 billion people in Africa. 40% of the working age population of the world is going to be in Africa. 40% of the working age population of the world is going to be in Africa. We must, as Europeans, look at the economic opportunity, you might say the economic responsibility we have, because this is neighbors. It's adjacent to us. You mentioned the Mediterranean, a small lake. So we have a responsibility to that. So absolutely, the world is growing. Others are more powerful. It's not a European-dominated world. But we have significant assets that we can bring to global development in partnership with India, to mention that. But I do think, apart from the fact that Samir is here, the Indian relationship is, of course, of tremendous importance for the future, for both of us.
Being a bit mindful of the time, obviously, let me take some questions here from our audience members. Annunziata Magis, for instance, and I rephrased her question a bit. She says, first of all, the question is, are we already in a Cold War 2.0? And if so, how can liberal governments, such as European countries and the US and so on and so forth, stand up to more authoritarian governments such as Russia and China? You know, somebody, I think, said Europe is a vegetarian in a sea of carnivores or something, you know, in the sense that, do we have the stamina? Do liberal democracies have the tools at the end of the day to succeed over countries that are ruling with an iron fist, Samir?
I wish they did, and I wish they came together and banded together. But if Cold War 1.0 was any indication, that's unlikely. Cold War 1.0 was a Northern Hemisphere affair, largely a rich country affair. A non-aligned movement of the poorest countries came up around the same time. Countries that did not have the sufficient funds to manage their own affairs banded together and created a third space where they did not have to choose between the USSR and the USA. I suspect if China and US today were to try and carve the world into two spheres of influence, they might be surprised that there would be a very large number of no-shows. Most people are not going to sign up to either the American project or the European or the Chinese project. In fact, one of the reasons which I did not mention, Europe-India partnership is important so that we don't have to come to that situation where we are being pulled into these corners. We are Middle Earth in some mythological fairy tale that Louisa, where we live in a green space. In that, we are Middle Earth, that green space, that sensible space, the space that was the cradle of globalization as we knew it, and we have to hold the center. So in many ways, I think a European-Indian partnership, a European-Indian and some other countries, and by the way, let's not be pompous, we would require a club of 10 to 15 emerging and emerged countries working together, banded together, coming. So that's the first part. The second is, should liberal democracies take on China, Russia, etc., etc.? History tells us that liberal democracies have done very well partnering with dictatorships and autocracies and illiberal regimes when it suited their parochial national interests. There is no dictator in the world who has not been funded either by Europe or America in the past. They've also gone and shot them later. But it is true that every dictator in the world has been funded out of the Atlantic Order that used to manage it. So I don't think, again, that democracy is just because you are a democracy as a society, your international relations will not be more in some sense, pragmatic. And if I'm polite, more pragmatic, and do deals with the devil. So I'm not confident that democracies can create a united front, but I'm confident that a few of us can hold the center. And there I again say the Indian Union and the European Union have to work together. We are 16% of humankind, or 17% of humankind. You are 17% of GDP. Let's combine.
Carl, Jenny Teller, and again, I'm rephrasing here. Certainly some of the international institutions that were created after 45, which you mentioned, the United Nations, of course, being the most prominent one, is paralyzed in many ways. We see it on the issue of Ukraine, of course. We see it on Gaza. We see it on many other countries. Everybody, if I had a dime for every time somebody told me that we need to reform the Security Council, I'd be a rich man by now. What is the way out here? Because clearly the Security Council members are not going to abolish themselves.
I think that's unlikely to happen, and I think all of us can have our schemes for how to reform the Security Council, and we can all dream about that for a while. It's not going to happen. I made myself immensely unpopular when I was foreign minister in a European Union country by suggesting that we should only have one EU seat in the Security Council. It didn't go down that well in Paris, I can tell you.
Or London.
Or London. I mean, it was an unthinkable thing. It didn't go down well in Berlin either, because they were living.
They were part of the G4.
Yeah, well, and they were living under the illusion that they could get a Security Council seat, and whatever. So that's going to be a dilemma for a long time to come. But don't forget that the United Nations isn't only, and I would say is not even primarily, what you see in New York. It is the daily work done by the specialized agencies. Correct. I mean, Vienna has the International Atomic Energy Authority, immensely successful and immensely important in the daily work it does. World Food Programme is one of my favorites.
UNDP, for example, the UNDP. And
UNDP as well, but I mean the World Food Programme, amazing in their ability to help people who are really suffering starvation and being out there very quickly. Other, UNICEF, I mentioned the progress in bringing down child mortality. UNICEF is vaccinating babies all over the world in a way that was unthinkable before. WHO, I have a function with them. We have a conference call on Friday on the Mpox thing. I understand nothing of the substance, I have to add. But we had the first conference call of a mechanism that I'm part of, set up over the COVID. And it's amazing, sort of, it's digital. And you have experts from all over the world. Scientists and industrial people and UNICEF and Global Fund and Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance. I mean, there are examples of globalization and global governance really working. But the longer they are, or the bigger the distance from the Security Council, the better. But we should not forget that, and we should be careful to preserve it, because it is more important for global well-being, for human security, than I think we are aware of on a daily basis.
We're almost out of time, and I know, Samir, you have a dinner in Munich today, which I don't want you to be late to. But just lastly, and perhaps 30, 60 seconds each before we wrap up.
You're asking an Indian to speak in 60 seconds.
Well, you know, that's going to be an interesting exercise, but I know you can do it.
Thought experiment.
I know you can do it. I have full faith in you. There are a lot of young people here. at the Alpbach Forum who've been with the forum for many years, and they are listening to this conversation and probably thinking deeper and deeper as the discussion evolves with some sense of perhaps pessimism. Let's end on an optimistic note here. What is your message to the young people moving forward in the 21st century? How can we maintain our peaceful lifestyle? Yeah, please.
The good thing that has happened with old white men and some old brown men failing in our responsibilities of delivering governance to people, the good thing that has happened is that never before in the history of humankind has the street been so powerful. I think today, citizens, courtesy technology, courtesy participatory processes, courtesy democracies that we have strengthened over 7 decades, have greater say in decision-making than they ever did. And it's a fact. Don't underestimate your power. Shame people. Name them. And make them change. In fact, last time when I was called to the UNSC and I was asked how can we reform the Security Council, I said for much too long, you colonizers have been impervious to the streets. The streets must be turned onto the Security Council. You must be shaped into abdicating every seat. Can a colonizer like the UK still have a permanent membership of the Security Council? It is injustice. It is absolutely a travesty of everything we stand for if the French and the UK can occupy those 2 seats. It hurts 180 nations when they sit there. And there is no reason why they need to be. So the streets and the youth today are wiser, more vocal, and have the capacity to mobilize and create collectives for change. Don't wait for us to give you a solution. We failed. #fail. You will find the solutions where you will solve the problems of the world that we are giving you in plenty. So we are bequeathing to you a burning planet, a divided polity, a democracy under strain, and a very, very uncaring institutional framework. Carl was talking about the WHO. Let me just tell you. I'll tell you what the Global South is. People ask me, what does Global South mean? I said, just remove the countries during the pandemic that received their first vaccines within 1 year of the pandemic. If you remove those countries, 35 of them, the rest is the Global South. That is the Global South. Just look at the countries and where they stood during the Middle East vote and where they stood during the Ukraine vote. And you will know the difference between the North and the South. The North were missing in the Middle East. It's a fact. When we were questioning what was happening in the Middle East in the recent times, you saw the global North disappear, or rather take entrenched positions. And that is the global North. So it is very easy to know what is the global North and what is the global South. You only have to read behind the numbers, as Louisa mentioned. That is your truth. Behind the numbers, you're doing well. Don't take our advice. Continue doing it. Fight the battle.
Put very eloquently and precise in 60 Indian seconds. Carl.
That was 60 Indian seconds.
There you have it.
No, I'm often asked if I'm an optimist or pessimist about the future. And I am an optimist. If we can avoid a global war, primarily nuclear war, and that remains extremely important, we are in an age where science and technology is developing enormously. Even issues like sort of health and climate and other things might be able to addressed a decade or 2 down the road in ways we can't even think of. We are reaching out into space, we are reaching down into the DNA of human beings, we are doing things and it will be accelerated by AI, it will be accelerated by quantum computing. We are on the verge of something that could be very major breakthrough for a better humanity. Keep war away, and we have every reason to be immensely optimistic about the future.
Well, thank you. On that, On that note, I think you would agree this was a fascinating discussion. I think when I introduced the two gentlemen as intellectual heavyweights, they did not disappoint. I think they delivered and gave us a lot of food for thought. Now, before we end this, perhaps we can have Anna Stürk, Luisa Neubauer, and Andreas Tracher. Let's do the farewell together. Let's come up here and let's do the. Come in the middle. Come in the middle.
Ladies in the middle.
Come in the middle. I think you would all agree. The opening of Austria and Europe Days was fascinating. A lot of inputs that we took from you on climate, democracy, security, finance, economy, all these issues that will not go away anytime soon. But you heard it from Samir. Don't listen to him, listen to them. This is #fail. It's not the official hashtag of the European Forum, but it might just become it right afterwards. Thank you so much for your attention. Appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you, Luisa. Thank you.